All right. Good evening, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started here. So we've only got a couple of you, but might as well have you type into the chat here. Let me know what your goal score is. And just a little bit about our session today. We're going to be focusing on some of the hardest grammar-based questions on the SAT, specifically grammar questions from College Board's question bank that are not a part of the practice exams. I didn't want to spoil anything for you guys. So all of the questions that we go over today are going to be a score band of 7, which is the hardest rating that you're going to find based off of College Board's internal data. But again, these are going to be questions that are in the question bank, but not on the practice exam. So don't worry about that. I'm not going to spoil anything for you. And it looks like both you guys are aiming high. We got 1500 plus, 1450 plus. So this is actually a perfect class for you guys because you're probably at the point where you really should only be focusing on hard questions. If you have time, definitely give each question a shot on your own first. I'm going to be going over them in detail. So hopefully while I'm rambling on, you'll have a chance to go ahead and try them on your own. And if you want to go ahead and type in your guess for what the answer is in the chat, that's totally fine as well. And if you're watching the replay of this, definitely pause the video and try these questions on your own first. And because this is going to be sort of a just like working through hard questions type of class rather than, teaching you concepts, I will be okay with answering questions as we're working on them. Normally, I like to save questions till the end, but for this particular session, feel free to shoot questions into the chat as we're working on questions if you have them, and I will go ahead and answer those, and then I'll also do just a general Q&A at the end of the class. Welcome, is it Usman? Nice to have you join us, and we're just about to get started with our very first question here. And then one more thing I didn't mention in the notes here. So when I'm talking about grammar, I do differentiate the grammar-based questions from the punctuation questions. So we're not covering punctuation today. It's all going to be grammar. So basically the form, structure, and sense skill that you're going to find on the College Board questions. But let's go ahead and get into it. All right, first question here. Take a look, and with any punctuation or grammar question, I always do recommend that you start with the answer choices because they're going to give you an idea of what you're dealing with. Not only are they going to tell you if it's punctuation or grammar, but if it is grammar, which in this case, obviously it is, the whole class is grammar, it's going to tell you what type of grammar question you're dealing with. So interestingly, because some of these are going to be band 7, they might not be as easy to identify as some others. For example, if we didn't know that this didn't involve any punctuation, we might see that there's like a couple of comma choices, a couple of choices without commas, and we might be thinking, oh man, does this actually have something to do with punctuation? But also, obviously, we've got intending, intends, intending, intends. So it's almost as if this is a mix between punctuation and grammar where we're focusing on verbs, but there's also comma options. So this is one of the reasons I wanted to bring this question to the table because it's kind of an oddball. And I've noticed more of these in the recent releases from College Board. So I'm thinking it might be something that you're going to encounter on the December SAT, possibly on the SATs in early 2026. So let's talk about it. How do we approach this? Typically, if we have verbs, we're going to use the odd verb out trick. But here, because we already have this weird thing going on, we're not going to worry about that. We'll get into that later. Instead, let's actually consider our options. And because there are some punctuation options as well, let's look at what would happen with those. So this person, we're going to go ahead and change American abstract artist Richard Serra to this person, just to kind of simplify. This person is intending his installations to make da 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 And then we have another comma here. And the reason that I'm pointing this out is if we have a comma here and there are options to have commas, we want to probably check for non-essential information. So how do we do that? We basically get rid of everything between the two commas. So because I'm kind of picking up on that, I want to get rid of those. And I want to see what's happening. So this person, if we go with B, we would say this person assembles large-scale steel plates into sculptures that dominate the outdoor spaces they occupy. You can hear that that sounds great. That's actually a full sentence by itself. So we could treat all that stuff as non-essential information. And because of that, we can go ahead and get rid of choices A and D because we don't have the comma that we need. And then between B and C, we have something interesting going on because if we wanted to just go on from this blank space and not think about the fact that this is non-essential information, it would make a lot more sense to say this person intends his installations to make da 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 da. But we already have the main verb assembles. This person assembles large scale da 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 da. So everything in the non-essential information actually needs to not have that main verb. So instead, choice C is going to be our answer. And I have been sort of skipping over the nitty-gritty of what's said in the middle, but I like to do this because the SAT tends to give us some really complicated sentences to work with. So what I like to do is I like to simplify by coming up with something more straightforward. So we'll say this person wondering why he was hungry, ate an entire pizza. And a sentence as simple as that hopefully makes a lot more sense to you guys, where we can clearly see what's going on. We have non-essential information, which is the fancy term for it is going to be a participle phrase, but basically we have like this ing verb phrase that gives us extra information about what was going on with this person as he ate an entire pizza. So in this case, it's the same exact thing. It's telling us that this person assembles these large scale plates, and then all the stuff in the middle is giving us extra information about why he does this. It's because he's intending his installations to make people aware of how movements are affected by physical features. So if you're ever having a hard time digesting what the SAT gives you, simplify it. Try and come up with a similar construction with a much simpler a sentence, basically. So that's our first one. And again, if you guys have any questions, I'm happy to actually answer them in the middle of class here. I'll do a Q&A at the end, but we could also talk about it in the middle. All right, next question here. And definitely feel free to give it a try at your own first. Even if you want to type into the chat what you think the answer is, feel free to do that as well. Oh, by the way, Usman, sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. Usman, if you want to go and type your goal score in as well, that'd be awesome. So again, starting with the answer choices, it is pretty clear to me, and hopefully at this point pretty clear to you guys if you've been taking my courses, that we're dealing with modifiers. We know this because every single answer starts with a different grammatical subject, right? We're sort of delivering the same message, but we're starting with different grammatical subjects. That is an indication that we're dealing with modifiers. And what's more, after we do look at the passage, it's more or less just a single sentence, but the passage, there's always going to be a comma before the blank space. So what do we do with modifiers? Even though this is rated score band 7, I'm going to just go ahead and say that every single modifier question, once you get used to them, should be pretty easy to deal with because we're going to use the front flip trick. Basically, what we want to do is we want to make sure that whatever's being described before the comma which is known as like our modifier, should come right after the comma. And an easy way of spotting this is taking the beginning of our answer choices and making a new simple sentence by flipping it onto the front of this sentence. So here, we'd say something like, here, and since it's despite being this stuff, we could say like, here are cheap, versatile, and easy to produce. And, little bonus tip, here is never going to be your answer for these types of questions because that just doesn't make sense. Two problems. Two problems are cheap, versatile, and easy to produce. Well, does that make any sense? Not really, because we don't typically try to produce problems. Problems are not typically thought of in terms of how valuable they are, so that doesn't really make any sense. Choice C, commercial plastics, two associated problems. So even though we're starting with commercial plastics, because we have possession here, the main subject of choice C is still problems. We already said that problems doesn't make sense, so C is out. And then it looks like Usman got the correct answer, good job, which is choice D. Because if we say commercial plastics are cheap, versatile, and easy to produce, that makes complete sense. So at the end of the day, those questions should be really easy for you, even though this is rated, the hardest type of grammar question according to College Board. Once you know the trick, it's pretty easy. There is a variation on this that's slightly more challenging, and I do have a couple of those questions in this question pack as well, so we should be able to get to those. I'm looking to at least hang out with you guys for 30 minutes or so here, if not a little bit longer. So let's look at the next one. And same deal, go ahead and try it on your own first. Even type the answer into the chat if you'd like. All right, so looking at our answer choices, it should be pretty clear that we're dealing with possession. The reason being is we have different apostrophe options, right? We've got apostrophes for both of these words. We've got it for one. Looks like we've got it for one, but there's an S missing. We've got no apostrophes. And apostrophes are typically just going to be possession. And on the SAT, they're definitely going to have some sort of possession options, even though they could just make contractions. It's always going to mean that we're dealing with possession. So one of the things that you can do is try and figure out, of the words that are proposing possession, which ones actually are possessing something. And you can use something called the of the trick. So looking at this one, and we'll go ahead and skip the first sentence for now, it says, for instance, from 1970 to 2020, rock and raps, or rocks and raps course to verse ratios. So we can see that we have sort of a plural subject here. And then the ratios seem to be the thing that may or may not be possessed. So what you could say out loud to yourself, or I guess not out loud, but we could say in your head to yourself is the ratios of rock and rap. Does that make sense? Yeah. If it does make sense, it means we do want possession. So we would get rid of choice A for sure, because choice A has no possession. And then we've got an interesting rule, because we're trying to figure out, do we want to have possession for both of these words or just one of these words? And what is the rule? So the rule is, if you have two subjects, whether it be people or, objects, and they own something together, then you only need one apostrophe. So for example, if I said Ada and Bob's car is going to break down, because I only have an apostrophe for Bob, the last person in my list, even though it's only a list of two people, this tells us along with the fact that car is singular, that this car belongs to Bob and Ada. They own it together. And that's why we want one apostrophe for the last person in the list, because they own this car together. On the other hand, if I said Ada's and Bob's, we'll say houses, are both up for sale. Now we have two apostrophes and we have plural houses. There's another indicator, and the word both. So we know that there are two individual houses, one owned by Ada, one owned by Bob. Because they do not own these houses together, now we need apostrophes for both of them. And then in this case, we have ratios, plural, which is a dead giveaway that we're talking about Rock's ratio and Rap's ratio. They do not own the same ratio together. They have different ratios. So for that reason, we're going to go with choice B on this one. All right. Go ahead and try this one out on your own first, if you're so inclined. You should be instantly recognized that we're dealing with another modifier question. So we're going to go ahead and jump into the front flip trick. Vegetables and grains were supported by biochemical analyses. That does not make sense, does it? Right? So choice A is not going to work. And just to kind of get you in my brain here, like, why would we be why would vegetables and grains be supported by analyses? I could see like analyzing vegetables and grains, but why would they need support? Normally something that's being supported is like a hypothesis or something like that. So that's kind of like what I'm thinking and why I'm saying no to that one, in case it wasn't clear. Choice B, diets. And see, I'm skipping straight to diets because we have that apostrophe. So everything here is just the thing that possesses the diets. Diets were supported by biochemical analyses of over 2,000 skeletons. And I went a little bit farther on that one because I could see maybe like the choice of a certain diet being supported by something. That one still just doesn't feel right at all. If you wanted to hold on to that one, you could, but not really working for me. So B is out. The primary components of diets were supported by biomedical analyses. That one, again, has kind of the same issue as the choice B there, where I just don't see why we would be supporting components of a diet. Doesn't really make sense in any way to me. So C is out. And then let's hope that D makes sense. Findings were supported by biochemical analyses. See, that's what I'm talking about. I said normally it's going to be something like a hypothesis. Findings would also totally make sense, right? Because if we're analyzing something, that analysis in a study, it would make sense for that to support our findings. So again, with these, when we do the front flip trick, we're really just trying to find an answer that makes logical sense. For the sake of argument, just to kind of break it down for you guys, let's pretend that we did think, I don't know, diets made sense. Then we could go on to read just a little bit more for context and compare, right? So findings from this study were supported by this analysis of a bunch of skeletons. Okay. If we looked at B, these diets were found to be, these diets were supported by analyses of 2,000 skeletons. And then we go on to kind of look at the rest of it. In a 2020 study, to have primarily consisted of vegetables and grains. There's just not really a connection there. Like, how would skeletons be supporting diets? Like if anything, if you're trying to support a diet, you'd probably want to have some sort of results saying that the diet is good for you or something like that. There's just not enough detail there. Like you'd probably want somebody who's at least alive to support, a diet. So that's the logic in my head, at least. But again, I would have just gotten rid of B and C at the start of that. Welcome, Judy, by the way. If you want to type your goal score into the chat, feel free. Also, I'm going to go ahead and take questions throughout the class because we're basically just working on a bunch of really hard grammar questions. I'll do a general Q&A at the end, but I'm also happy to answer any questions that you have during the session here. And we've got a pretty small group, so if you have a question, you could click the little button, raise your hand, or even just type it into the chat. And yeah, depending on how things go, I might even just have you unmute and we can chat for a second if you'd like. But let's look at the next one here. So as always, starting with the questions, I can tell that I'm dealing with the verbs. There's no weird commas this time, so it's straight up verbs. And here's the great thing with verbs. You're going to start with the odd verb out trick. And in case you guys have not gotten to this point in my lessons or haven't seen my videos about this, the odd verb out trick is pretty straightforward. We're going to have they, and we're going to have either he, she, or it. I'll just take she for this one. And we would say she underlies, she is underlying, she has been underlying, but we would say they underlie. So without having to read anything, I know that my answer is the odd verb out, which is choice C. And yes, this works. It works every single time. It's worked for every single official College Board question in the question bank and every exam so forth since the test went digital. I think it has something to do with the way that these questions are designed. There's no way for it to not work if it's subject verb agreement. But, just to kind of, and good job, by the way, I think, Usman got that one correct. Just to, prove it to ourselves. If you ever want to just feel a little bit better, do the odd verb out trick and then just check to make sure. So we should have a plural subject. And indeed, we have the idea that the various cultural and ideological frameworks underlie each reaction. So in this case, frameworks is going to be that plural subject that we're looking for in that one. But really, just use the odd verb out trick. It's a huge time saver. And because this is rated band 7 hard, you will get tricked if you don't use it, if you're not paying close attention. Because look how long this sentence is, right? It starts at the very beginning. There's just so many things that could be our subject. We've got parentheses. We've got this non-essential information. There's just a lot going on. So be lazy. Trust me. All right, next one here. Looking at the answer choices, should be pretty clear that we're dealing with modifiers once again. And this is the harder variation that I was talking about. The reason is that we have that of. And in case you haven't gotten to this portion of my courses, you always want to be very careful when you see that of or those of. The reason being is we have these words that are pointing to something that is not the main thing from the sentence. And I know that sounds a little bit vague, so let me specifically dive into what's going on here. So if we start doing our front flip trick, we have a market is compared with that of a highly concentrated market. So the highly concentrated market and the market, those are sort of the focus here. But because it says that of, anytime we see that of or those of, it means that we are focusing on some sort of a component of that thing. I'll give you an example. Let's type it up here above me. We'll say the beard of the gnome was longer than that of the wizard. So even though we're talking about beards, we're talking about a gnome and a wizard, specifically, we're talking about a component, which is the beard of the gnome, the beard of the wizard. So we would want to say the beard of the gnome is compared to that of the wizard, that being the beard of the wizard. If we just said was longer than the wizard, now we're comparing a beard to a wizard instead of a beard to a beard. So there's a very simplified version of basically what this is dealing with. For that reason, choice A is not going to work, right? Because a market is compared with that of a highly concentrated market. No, we need a component of a market, so A doesn't work. Choice B, the HH score is compared with that of a highly concentrated market. That seems to be a component of a market, so we'll keep that one. Sorry about the formatting here. I don't know what I did. When a market, it's one of those weird ones where it's not really going to work because we have when is compared with that of a concentrated market. When is not a component of a market, so nope. And then choice D, a less concentrated market is compared with that of a highly concentrated market. No, because again, even though we're talking about different kinds of markets, we don't want a market compared to a market. We want some sort of a component. And the only component seems to be this HHI score. To be clear, I have no idea what an HHI score is, but if it's a component of a market, that's good enough for me. So D is not going to work. It's going to be choice B. All right. Next one here. Feel free to try and guess the answer if you'd like. But again, it looks like we're dealing with verbs. So we will start with our odd verb out trick. We're going to grab they. We'll say he this time. We would say they fascinate. He has fascinated. He fascinates. He is fascinating. And just like that, the odd verb out is choice A, and our answer is choice A. And again, just to make you guys feel better about it, so shrewd an observer is a lady in waiting that her book's musings, boom, musings plural, musings fascinates. So our answer is choice A. And I hope you're okay with me going a little bit quicker through that one since we just did one like it a minute ago. All right. Speaking of which, it looks like we have more verbs here. So I'll go ahead and use it since I haven't used it yet. We'll say they, we'll say it. They are, they were, they have been, it was. Just like that, our odd verb out is it was. And again, her survey was instrumental. And we can easily make that connection if we work backwards because we have parentheses that can be ignored. We have non-essential information between these two commas that can be ignored. We have a prepositional phrase which can be ignored. So basically, her survey was instrumental in the decision. And that was sort of the old school way of dealing with these, is getting rid of any sort of non-essential information via parentheses, comma sandwiches, dash sandwiches. And again, prepositional phrases are, basically just giving you more information about the main subject, right? Prepositional phrases being any word that starts with a preposition of happens to be a preposition. That can still be useful, especially in, I would say, pronoun-based questions. So if you don't already have a good idea of what prepositions look like, that's something you might want to look into. All right. Okay. So we've seen a lot of verbs, and I'm seeing more verbs, but it looks like we kind of have this weird thing going on again, where even though we're dealing with verbs, I see two options that are the same except for a comma. I see one that doesn't have a verb at all, and then we've got a different verb tense. So we already should know that the odd verb out trick is not going to work. And we should know that we want to be careful because this might have something to do with punctuation in addition to having to do with verbs. Again, this is a rare question type, just started showing up more with the August releases from College Board. So something that you're probably going to be encountering more and more. And honestly, I kind of like it because as you saw from those last couple of questions, the verb questions are like almost too easy. Although I'm sure we'd be happier if they were all just as easy as possible. But anyway, let's get into it. So, English poet and Shakespeare contemporary John Donne's works. So, we're going to again simplify. We're just going to say John Donne's works were much admired during his lifetime. So, I'm just kind of playing with choice A there. And this is the danger of choice A. If you just read this, it sounds wonderful, right? In fact, if we went with D, it would also sound kind of nice. John Donne's works had been much admired during his lifetime. So we might be thinking, well, there's no reason why we should have a comma because we want to connect our subject to its verb. So it's not going to be B, it's not going to be C. And let's just try and figure out, do we have simple past tense or do we have past perfect tense? And then if we read a little bit later, we're going to see like had been, and we're going to say, ooh, choice D. And we're going to be wrong because this is not choice D. Why? Well, we made a terrible mistake by being too lazy. I do encourage laziness, but with punctuation and grammar, you got to at least read a single sentence, man. So let's see what happens after this. John Donne's works were much, we'll stick with choice A, were much admired during his lifetime and in the decades that followed. Had, at the time, this is non-essential information, had been essentially gathering dust for prepositional phrase. So I'm still being lazy. I'm ignoring certain parts, but I'm getting through the entire sentence. And now I'm starting to notice we have a problem. Since choice D is the one that I pretended to like, let's try choice D. If we say, John Donne's works had been much admired during his lifetime and in the decades that followed, had been essentially gathering dust. There's a problem. We have two main verbs, right? We're saying had been twice. Had they been admired or had they been essentially gathering dust? It would be fine if we had like and they had been essentially gathering dust, but we don't have that. So this doesn't work. We actually need to not have a verb because we already have a verb for the works, which is had been, which comes later. So in fact, we're dealing with more non-essential information. Choice, believe it or not, C. Because here's what's going on. John Donne's works had been essentially gathering dust. That's our main sentence. Much admired during his lifetime and then the decades that followed, that is non-essential information, giving us extra info about those works. So super tricky question here. And one of the reasons that I brought it to this class because it's so tricky. And definitely let me know if you have any questions about that. I'm even happy to jump back to it if you're not understanding. But for now, I will jump into the next question. All right, how are we doing on time here? We got time for a couple more. There's one. Okay, this is the one that I wanted to make sure that we get to because this one is crazy. Definitely encourage you to try this one. I will say, every private tutoring student that I have worked with on this question has missed it. So I challenge you, take a look at this. In fact, I'm going to pause. And if you guys are up for it, type what you think the correct answer is for this one. I also challenge you, no cheating. Well, actually, if you try to cheat, you also might get it wrong. Because I know a lot of people are trying to like throw this into ChatGPT or whatever. ChatGPT is not always going to get the right answer. And I've had a student tell me that ChatGPT got this one wrong as well. So take a look. I'll give you guys like 20 more seconds here. All right, it looks like nobody has dared to try and answer this one yet. I'm going to go through it. Don't worry. So here's what's going on. And I'll tell you what happens with most of my students. So we are dealing with possession, which is usually pretty easy. We can see that we have, a couple of different things that may or may not be possessing something. Something easy at first would be probably getting rid of choice A, because we have variables that, would we say that of the variables? No. So choice A is definitely not going to work. But then here's what happens. To fully describe the motion of an object requires knowing each of 5 variables that characterize object's movement. My students look at an object and they say, okay, this is the indicator that we have one single object, right? For that reason, we can definitely get rid of, choice D is out because we could say the movement of the object, right? So we need it to be possessive. And then they're thinking singular object, one object. That means choice C is my answer, because a singular object would have an apostrophe between the T and the S. This is plural. But here's the thing. It looks like, thank you guys for actually putting your answers in here, because this is what most students will put. It is actually choice B. Believe it or not. What the heck is going on? I think this is by far the hardest grammar question in the question bank right now that's not on one of the exams, because there's one little detail that if you don't notice, you're going to get this wrong. It says an object, singular, requires knowing each of 5 variables that characterize object's movement. We are missing a word. For it to be singular, we would need a word right here. We would need an object's movement, or the object's movement, or that object's movement, to clarify that we are singular, because we have an object that is referred to. That would refer to the same object. An object would sort of like go back to that idea that we're thinking about one object. The object would again refer to the singular object that we mentioned before. But without these words, we have no choice but to go plural. And the reason that it's okay, other than the fact that we're missing those words, is we are dealing with physics. So when we talk about characterize objects' movement, and this is also hard because movement is singular. How can they all have the same movement? Well, because we're talking about physics, and physics involves laws. So all objects have the same laws of movement. So for those 2 reasons combined, choice B has to be our answer, and choice B is okay and it makes sense. So very, very hard question. Definitely don't beat yourself up if you missed this one, but because this exists in the question bank, I just want to point it out. Be very careful. I would say the biggest thing, the easiest thing to spot is going to be, do you have an, the, that, some sort of word that makes it for sure singular? Because without those words, it has to be plural. And then if you want to think beyond that, just think about the fact that it's a very rare case where we have physics where all things can have the same property. But if there's some other circumstance that comes up on your exam, I guess that would be a way to sort of rationalize it yourself. All right. We are just about getting to time here. I really only wanted to go for about 30 minutes. We're at the 40-minute mark. So I'm going to jump into Q&A. I'll give you guys a chance to kind of think about your questions, and this is going to be a general Q&A. So if you want to ask about one of the questions we went over, that's fine. If you want to ask about anything else SAT related, that is also fine. So I'll give you guys a minute to come up with questions if you had them or to type them. And I guess I'll do one more question while you guys are coming up with those. That way I'm not just sitting here silently. So that one's too easy. Okay, this is a cool one. So here we have another one of those weird situations where it's like, okay, is it verbs or is it punctuation? What the heck is going on? And again, we want to just like consider our options here. And if there's commas, at this point, you should be used to just like looking for that non-essential information. So choice A and D, we've got a comma. So let's just see if there's some sort of an option for non-essential information. Let's also ignore the first sentence, at least for now. So there is a comma here. So let's play with that first. These extensive changes, the removal. Okay, there's another comma here. So let's play with this. These extensive changes reflected the poet's perspective. That makes sense. So that could be non-essential information. So we would get rid of B and C. Now, again, just like that other question, if we already have the main verb reflected, we don't want an additional main verb include. So it's going to be choice A. And that goes back to that same simple sentence that I created. Where is it? Where are you, simple sentence? Oh man, it's gone. It's like it never existed. I think I'm looking in the wrong place. Oh well. Sorry guys. But basically, what we have going on here, these extensive changes, including this, and this. So this one's even more complicated because our non-essential information includes a list. So there's like 2 other commas involving it. But at the end of the day, it's just these extensive changes reflected the poet's changing perspective. So choice A. All right. Let me jump in, see if you guys have any questions. Okay. It looks like we're not doing Q&A. Fair enough. I guess I just explained things so well. Well, thank you guys so much for coming. This is a relatively new program, so it's nice to have 4 of you this time. This is literally the first month that the Academy has been open. So my first class, I had 1 student. It's nice to have that quadrupled now. We have got a question. What's up, Judy? Will the math course launch within the next 3 months? Judy, the math course has already launched, and I'm actually happy to, hold on, let me get it open for you, show you the extent to which it has been launched, because it's not fully launched, which is maybe what your question actually means. I am looking to have the entire course out in the next 3 months. My goal is to have it out by the end of the year. It is kind of an ambitious goal, but I'm hoping to have the whole thing done by the end of the year. But it will definitely be out within the next 3 months. But let me kind of show you what we're dealing with so far that you already have access to. And I can show you what I'm working on as well, because I was literally working on the math course today. That's been the bulk of my work lately. So I guess you can't really see everything. Hold on. Gotta move some stuff around here. All right. So this is what we're dealing with right now. We've got the full module on Desmos currently available. We've got the full module on linear foundations currently available. We've got the full module on quadratic foundations currently available. I was today working on the advanced algebra. These lessons I'm looking to have out by the end of this month. And then after that, we just have, so, to be clear, once this module's out, that's 70% of the exam. The last 30% of the exam is going to be the problem solving and data analysis, hoping to get that done sort of like the first couple of weeks of December. and then to finish this by the second couple of weeks of December. But, I think a little bit more reasonable, I'll have them done by the end of January. But yeah, that's where we're at right now. And hopefully I'll be releasing these guys pretty soon in the next couple of weeks here. Yeah, no worries, Judy. I figured that's what you meant when you asked. And thank you for the question. And thank you for saying thank you. It is a lot of hard work, but it's a lot of fun. It's just also a big balancing act because I'm trying to make sure that I'm still getting good videos out for everybody on YouTube, making sure that I have good lessons planned for you guys for these. But then my main priority and the reason why I haven't been making as many YouTube videos is because I'm really trying to get this math course out, and I'm trying to make sure that it's quality, and I'm including all original questions because I want to give you guys lots and lots of questions to practice with. So that way, if you go through all of College Board's practice questions, you still have something to play with. All right. Doesn't look like anybody else had any questions that they added. So I'm going to go ahead and call it. But thanks again for showing up. And I hope you guys have a fantastic rest of your evening. And I hope to see you guys in the next class next week. We're going to do a little bit of just like last minute study together. All right. Bye-bye, Judy. See you guys.